The morning my son set a folder on my kitchen counter and told me to sign it, for my own protection, was the morning I finally understood what the last 2 years had been building toward. I stood at the same stove where I'd taught him to fry an egg when he was 8 years old, and I looked at that folder, and I looked at my son's face, and I realized that the woman he was looking back at, cautious, uncertain, still trying to keep the peace, was not who I intended to die as. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how a woman who spent 31 years teaching other people's children, who paid off a house by herself after her husband died, who has never once in her life asked anyone for a single thing. You need to understand how a woman like that can become a stranger in her own home. Not all at once. Never all at once. One small surrender at a time, until the day you look up and realize you've been retreating so long you've run out of room. My name is Luella Mae Graves. I'm 64 years old. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and I have lived in the same 3-bedroom house on Sycamore Dell Road for 31 years. My husband Bernard and I bought it in 1993 for $162,000, which felt like an act of faith at the time. We painted every wall ourselves. I chose the yellow in the kitchen. Bernard chose dark green for his study, and I teased him about it for 2 decades. But the truth is, I loved that green. It was his color. When he died 4 years ago, a stroke, on a Tuesday morning, sitting in his chair with the newspaper, I couldn't bring myself to repaint it. Still haven't. Bernard left me comfortable. His life insurance, my teacher's pension, the house paid off and worth close to $480,000 by the time any of this happened. I say that not to sound proud, but because it matters to the story. It matters because my son knew those numbers, and so did his wife. My son Jerome is 42. He has his father's eyes and a stubbornness that skips a generation. It came from Bernard's father, not Bernard himself. Jerome served 6 years in the Army, came home quieter than when he left, married Chandra about 8 years back. They had a house in Cordova, east of Memphis. 3 bedrooms, 2-car garage, good school district. They had my grandson Elias, who was 12 when everything began. On paper, they had a life. The call came on a Thursday in March. I was grading papers. I taught adult literacy 2 evenings a week at the community center, even in retirement, when my phone rang. Mama. Jerome's voice had a flatness to it I'd only heard once before, when he called to tell me Bernard was gone. What happened? What he told me took about 4 minutes. Chandra had opened a second mortgage on their house without telling him. Online gambling, she'd hidden it for 3 years. By the time Jerome found the account statements, they owed $91,000 against a house that had lost value, and the bank had begun foreclosure. 60 days. Jerome, I set down my red pen. Why didn't she? I don't know, Mama. His voice broke at the end. I don't know. Come home, I said. Same as any mother would say. Come home, both of you. Bring Elias. Stay as long as you need. Sitting in my kitchen that night, I told myself it would be good to have noise in the house again. Bernard's study had been quiet for 4 years. Jerome's old bedroom smelled like cardboard boxes. I told myself this was God giving me back something I'd been missing. I believed it was temporary. I want to be clear about that. They arrived on a Saturday in April with a rented truck and 4 years of a life compressed into what the bank hadn't touched. Jerome moved boxes with the mechanical focus of a man who cannot stop or he'll fall apart. Chandra was composed in a way that struck me even then. Hair done, eyeliner straight, moving through my house like she was taking inventory. Elias ran to me across the yard and hugged me so hard. I stumbled back a step. Grandma, he held on an extra moment. You okay, baby? He pulled back and looked at me with those serious eyes. Are you? Smart boy, 12 years old and already asking the right questions. The first month was good. Jerome repaired the loose step off the back porch I'd been stepping around for over a year. Chandra cooked dinner twice. Elias helped me in the garden without being asked, crouching next to me in the dirt, learning which were weeds and which weren't. We ate most dinners together, Jerome said grace. I made Bernard's peach cobbler on Sundays. It felt like family, the real kind. Then, without my being able to point to an exact moment, the weight of things started shifting. Month 2, Jerome started calling the house our place when he was on the phone with friends. Small thing. I told myself it was just language. Month 3, Chandra asked to rearrange the living room. She said the flow was off. I said yes because I am not a woman who fights over furniture. She moved Bernard's reading chair to a corner behind a ficus. I moved it back, She moved it again. I left it where she put it the second time. I don't know why. Something in me just stopped arguing that particular point. I'd learn later that was where it always starts. Month 4. Jerome told me he could only give me $350 a month toward the household. His paycheck was going to lawyer fees and debt repayment. $350 didn't cover the electric bill. I said nothing. They were rebuilding, I told myself. Month 5. Chandra began bringing real estate clients through the house. She'd gotten her license renewed and started a small team. I'd hear her voice floating up from the downstairs hallway. Original hardwood. Restored. Great bones. The kitchen was updated about 6 years ago. She spoke about my house with the authority of someone who had built something, when what she'd done was walk in through a door I'd opened. But I let it go. Month 6. Jerome came to me with a figure, $28,000, a debt consolidation that would clean up the last of the foreclosure damage. He was looking at my kitchen table when he said it, not at me. He had an IOU on a legal pad. I went to the bank the next morning and wrote the check. He hugged me in the driveway. Thank you, Mama. I'll pay you back, every cent. I kept a notebook. 31 years of teaching had trained me to document everything. I wrote down $28,000 and the date, the same way I used to write down attendance. By month 8, Chandra had stopped helping around the house entirely. Jerome worked late most nights. Elias ate dinner with me more often than not. He was 13 by then, all elbows and quiet observations. One evening while I washed dishes, he came and stood beside me and picked up a towel without being asked. "Grandma," he said, drying a bowl, "why do you let them talk to you like you're company?" I looked at him. "Like you're visiting," he said, "in your own house." I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window at the Japanese magnolia Bernard had planted for our 20th anniversary, and I thought about how long it had taken that tree to bloom the first time. "Your dad's been through a lot," I said. "That doesn't make it right." He was 13 years old. He already understood what I was spending months explaining away. Month 11. My son told me, without asking, that his army friend Leon would be staying with us for 2 weeks. Leon and his girlfriend. That was 5 adults and a teenager in a 3-bedroom house. I gave up my sewing room. I started waking up early to have the kitchen to myself before the crowded hours began. I overheard Jerome on the back porch one afternoon talking to Leon. "It works out. Mom's retired. She doesn't need all this space. We're going to update the place eventually anyway." We're going to update the place. I stood in the hallway and held those words in my mouth for a moment. Then I went upstairs, opened my notebook, and wrote them down. Month 14. I walked into Bernard's study and found Chandra measuring the walls with a tape measure. His books were in a box in the corner. His roll-top desk, the one he'd saved 2 years to buy, was pushed against the wall. "I'm thinking this could be a proper home office," she said. "Calm, patient, the way you speak to someone elderly and slightly confused. Better than the dining room table." "That's Bernard's study." She looked at me. "I know, but it's just sitting here, Luella." Luella. She dropped the miss months back and I hadn't corrected her. "Please don't move his things," I said. "Of course not. I wouldn't." The next morning, her laptop was on his desk. Month 18. Jerome signed us up for a different cable package without mentioning it to me. Then Chandra bought a new dining room table, on a credit card opened in her name, and had my old one moved to the garage. I found out when I came downstairs for breakfast and a stranger was assembling something where my grandmother's table had been for 20 years. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed and counted to 5 the way I'd learned to do when a parent was screaming at me about a grade. And I needed to remember that my response was the only thing under my control. Then I opened my notebook to a new page. Month 20. Jerome came to me again. Another $15,000, this time for Chandra's real estate business expansion. I looked at my notebook first. $43,000 already. I thought for a long time. Then I wrote the check, because I was still choosing to believe that family is worth the cost of faith. The next morning, I came downstairs early. Chandra was in the kitchen on the phone, walking someone through what sounded like a listing pitch. I stopped in the doorway when I heard the address, my address. 3 bedrooms, original details, double lot, substantial equity. The owner is elderly and living with family. Yes, we're assessing options going forward. I stood in the hallway, assessing options. About my house that I owned outright, that my name alone was on. that I had paid for with 31 years of standing in front of other people's children and teaching them to read. I went back to my room, sat at my writing desk, opened my laptop, and I looked up the name of a real estate attorney. I didn't move yet. I gave it 11 more days. Old habit, a good teacher confirms before she confronts. Then the folder appeared on my kitchen counter on a Thursday. Jerome was standing beside it, coffee in hand, expression arranged into something careful. "Mama, I need you to look at this." I looked at it without touching it. A power of attorney document. "Financial decisions," he said. "Just a precaution." Chandra's colleague had prepared it. A notary. Not a lawyer, a notary who worked with Chandra. "I'm not signing that," I said. "Mama, it's just in case something happens." "Nothing has happened to me. I want you to leave this kitchen, please." He left. I stood at the counter looking at the folder for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Dora Fields, who had handled Bernard's estate, and who I should have called 6 months earlier. Dora looked at the document for 90 seconds. "Do not sign this, under any circumstances." She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Has anyone discussed selling the property?" "Not directly to me." She turned to her computer. "Give me your address." She turned the screen toward me a minute later. "A real estate listing. Coming soon. My address. Listed under Chandra's team as the representing agency. Estimated list price, $485,000. My house. Listed without my knowledge or consent. They'd needed my signature on the power of attorney to make it legal. That was what the folder had been for." I sat very still in that chair. "She can't sell without your signature," Dora said. "That's why they needed the POA. But Luella," she paused, "I want to run something else. How much have you given them?" I put my notebook on her desk. She read for a long time. $58,000, she said, when she finally looked up. She'd added up the grocery bills I'd covered, the utilities, the 2 direct loans, the smaller amounts I'd handed over without thinking. "Documented," she said. Bernard always said to keep a paper trail. She smiled, small and grim. "Smart man." She closed the notebook. "Luella, I'm also going to run a background check on Chandra. Public records, do you want me to?" "Yes," I said. "Do everything." What Dora found took 1 day to pull together. Chandra had a previous marriage. Divorced in 2017, Knoxville. The filing cited financial misconduct. She had, while living with her ex-husband's mother, used the address, accumulated $31,000 in debt, and attempted to have the elderly woman sign a document presented as a utility transfer. The woman's daughter had discovered it before she signed. My son had either not known or not wanted to know. I drove home that evening and made dinner. Jerome's favorite, smothered chicken and rice, his grandmother's recipe. Elias sat across from me, quiet, watching my face with those patient eyes. "You okay, Grandma?" he asked. "I'm okay, baby," I said. "I'm thinking." About what? I looked at my grandson. About how sometimes you have to let people show you exactly who they are before you understand what you're supposed to do about it. He nodded slowly. He already knew. He'd been watching for months. 12 days later, Dora served them. I was in the backyard when the process server knocked on the front door. I heard Chandra's voice go sharp. I heard Jerome say my name like a question mark. I stayed in the garden with my hands in the soil until things went quiet. Jerome found me there 20 minutes later. "Mama," his voice was wrecked. "What did you do?" I stood up and brushed the dirt from my knees. "I protected myself," I said. "Something I should have done sooner." "You can't evict family." "I can, and I did. You have 30 days under Tennessee law. I gave you 20 more because you're my son. Use them well. Chandra's going to fight this. Dora has the listing Chandra posted without my consent. She has the power of attorney document. She has my notebook, and she has the Knoxville divorce records." I watched his face at that last part. "Did you know? About what she did before?" The silence told me everything I needed to know. "Jerome." My voice stayed steady even though my hands weren't. "You are my son. I will love you until I cannot breathe anymore. But you brought someone into this house who has done this before, who tried to steal it from me, and you said nothing." He had no answer. He stood there with Bernard's eyes and looked like the 8-year-old who used to bring me dandelions from the yard because he thought they were pretty. But he was 42, and I was not going back. They moved out 46 days later. Leon came with a truck. Chandra didn't speak to me. Elias held on at the door until Jerome called him. "Sunday," Elias said into my shoulder. "Every Sunday," I said. "Don't you forget." The civil case took 9 months. Dora was thorough and patient and relentless. The Knoxville records established pattern. My notebook established unjust enrichment. The unauthorized listing established attempted conversion of property. The judge, a woman in her 50s who read my notebook all the way through without speaking, awarded me $58,000 in repayment plus $19,000 in damages. Chandra filed for her second bankruptcy and paid nothing. Jerome paid $475 a month by court order. He didn't fight it. 3 months after the judgment, Elias told me on a Sunday call that his father had left Chandra, that the full picture of Knoxville had finally settled into him and he couldn't unknow it. 4 months after the judgment, I had Jerome to dinner, just the two of us, biscuits from Bernard's mother's recipe, the kitchen yellow and quiet around us. He sat at my grandmother's table, which I'd retrieved from the garage and had refinished, and he cried, "Not about the money, about the other thing. She kept telling me you needed to be managed," he said, "that you couldn't handle it alone, that we were helping you." He pressed his hands flat on the table. I let myself believe it because it was easier than believing the other thing. The other thing being that you knew something was wrong, and you stayed quiet. "Yes, ma'am," he said it soft. "Yes, ma'am." I poured him more coffee and sat back down. "Jerome, look at me." He looked up. "I forgive you," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we pretend. You've got some years of proving ahead of you, and I expect you to put in the work." "I know. And you're going to be a good father to that boy, whatever else happens." "I'm trying, Mama." Elias called during dessert, right on schedule, and we passed the phone back and forth. He was living with Jerome, doing well in school, talking about wanting to study law someday. Said he'd gotten the idea watching the civil case from the waiting room. I went out to the back porch after they hung up. April in Memphis is soft and green, and everything blooms at once. Bernard's magnolia was full and white against the darkening sky, the same tree, the same yard, the same porch boards I'd walked on for 31 years. The house behind me still had his green study and my yellow kitchen and every wall we'd painted together. It was mine. It had always been mine. I just spent 2 years forgetting to act like it. Here is what I know now, at 64, standing in the garden of a house I almost lost to people I'd chosen to love without limits. Generosity is not the same as self-erasure. Kindness without a line drawn is not virtue. It is an open door to anyone willing to walk through and keep walking until they reach the deed. Document everything. Know a lawyer. Trust your body when it tells you something is wrong. It knew before I did, and I ignored it because I was afraid of what listening would cost me. Bernard used to say, "Know what you own, Luella, and own it like you know." I'm learning. Better late than never, but I'm learning. If you're somewhere out there, listening, and you've been moving into smaller and smaller corners of your own life to make room for people who keep taking, I want you to hear this. You don't have to wait until they list your house on the internet. Your instincts are talking to you right now. They have been for months. Listen to them. I'm Luella May Graves. I'm 64 years old, and I am still and always home.